Hey, we are talking about adulting is hard, and that's a really fun way to kind of kick it off. Adulting is hard. And last week, we kind of introduced the idea that adulting is hard, and the internet kind of created this term adulting, and we make fun of things that are adulting. We make fun of the fact that, we have to pay our taxes, you gotta have a job, you gotta get places on time. If you're like an overachiever, you floss monthly, something like that. I mean, adulting is kind of hard, and the reality, though, is that kind of adulting stuff, it's hard, but you can figure that stuff out, right? If you don't show up on time enough, you get fired. You learn to do that, If you don't floss enough, well, nothing really happens with that one. But if you don't pay your taxes enough, there are departments created to remind you to do that. They will personally visit you if you don't do it. So when it comes to that kind of adulting, we can kind of figure that stuff out. And what we said last week is the reason adulting is hard is deeper than that. It's really the stuff that sits deeper in our heart that causes the problem. Here's how we said it last week. It's often the stuff beneath the surface of our adult hearts that really keep us from adulting well. It's that deeper stuff. It's not the superficial stuff. It's the stuff that makes adulting difficult, and you can't pinpoint what it is, but you just know it's not really going well. And there's something in there that's keeping you from being successful as an adult. And last week we introduced one of those ideas. It's a deeper idea. We talked about identity. We talked about how when we have a mistaken identity or an identity crisis, it really holds us back. It keeps us from adulting well. Here's kind of how we said it last week, that if what you do defines who you are, then your identity, who you are, your identity is going to be really circumstantial and really fragile and completely full of fear. Because if what you do defines who you are, then you got to be really successful. If you take a risk, you better accomplish it. If you play a sport, you better win. Because if what you do defines your identity, man, you better be really good. So last week we kind of gave an alternative that we could be who God says we are. And then out of that identity of being a child of God, we get to do all those things that we do, but we get to do it from a place of freedom. I hope for some of you that was a really helpful idea last week. In fact, watching on social media, so many of you commented about the things that you were thinking about and processing. I got to talk to so many of you who are in small groups, and I heard that a lot of your conversations were just really rich and kind of deeper, because this is a deeper kind of topic. And so I hope that was helpful as we kind of launched last week. Now this week, we're going to continue the conversation. Let me preview quickly what we're going to do next week. We're going to talk next week about insecurity. Doesn't that sound fun? Now, I know none of you are struggling with insecurity, so this is probably not for you, but you have friends that are, or neighbors, or family members, I don't know. Bring them with you next week, and maybe you'll learn something too, but bring the people who are struggling next week, because it'll be helpful. Today, though, we're gonna talk about another one of those big things that sits deep in our heart that really keep us from adulting well. Today, we're gonna talk about trust. Trust. Now, trust is a big deal that keeps us from adulting well. I don't know what you think of when you think about trust. Maybe you think of, a 2 or 3 year old who's leaping off the side of the pool into arms of a parent, or I don't know, maybe you think about being in the passenger seat with your 15-year-old son or daughter. It's a lot of trust. For me, when I hear the word trust, I immediately go back to being 10 years old and going to summer camp for the very first time. I don't know how many of you went to summer camp. It took a lot of trust to go to summer camp. We were gonna spend the night away for 12 days. That took a lot of trust. The very first year I went to summer camp, my counselor's name was Killer. That was his nickname. And he looked like he could have eaten me. I think that took a lot of trust. But the thing that really took trust was the ropes course. How many of you have ever been on like a ropes course? You ever done that before? Yeah, so this thing at this camp I went to, that was like the big deal there. They had this high ropes course. And I remember driving in my very first day and looking at all these wires and poles and stuff that was mounted in the trees. And part of me was nervous, but a bigger part of me was just really pumped, man, to get out there on the high ropes course. I remember they said, Thursday is high ropes course day. I was super pumped, man. I couldn't wait to go to sleep Wednesday night, but it was like Christmas Eve. I had trouble falling asleep because I wanted to go climb the trees and do all the fun, ropes course things. They had a zip line that was maybe 60 feet in the air on a tree. It was incredible. They had this thing called the pamper pole. And I didn't understand what the word pamper meant when I was, 10, but it's not a good thing when you're on the pole. It was this 40-foot telephone pole that had little pegs that you climbed up, and on the top of the telephone pole was just a little square as big as the pole. And you climbed all the way up to the top of the pole, and you stood on this thing as it swayed in the breeze, and you had to leap out and catch a trapeze that was a mile away when you're 10 years old. No 10-year-old could do it. So you pretty much climbed up to the top of this pole and just fell off. That's what we did when we were 10. But I remember being so excited to do the zip line and to do this pamper pole thing. And so Thursday morning, man, we got out there, and I was the first one there. And we get out there, and they say, before we can go up, on the high ropes course, we have to show you how to make a harness, because this was old school. We didn't have like the built harnesses already. They gave us a rope, and they told us how to tie a harness. And I'm like, hey, I'm 10, this feels really dangerous. But, we did it. But before we got to do all the fun stuff, they said, we got to do the low ropes course. And I said, that sounds boring. And it was. The first thing we did as a group is they blindfolded us, and they put us on a tree that was laying on the ground. We had to stand on the tree blindfolded. They said, you can't talk. You need to put yourself in order of your birthday. I was like, why are we doing that? It just seems like a complete waste of time, Later, we had to climb a big wall, like a 12-foot wall. We had to get all of us over the wall. That was really fun, But then eventually, it led to the high ropes course, so it was worth it. In fact, right before we got to do the high ropes course, they said, we got one more thing to do. In fact, I'm going to actually do a little bit of this. I'm going to get some volunteers. I need about 8 volunteers, preferably guys who like this church and also like me. If you don't like me, just stay where you are for a minute. You can tell me later, that's fine. But not. So 8 volunteers. Anybody want to come up here? Yeah, come up here. Yeah, right in the middle. That'll be fun. Come on up in the middle. I need 6 more. Anybody else? It's really not weird. Hey, and just come right down front of the stage. Just come right down front. Yeah, I got 2 over there. Yeah, another 3rd over there. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Come on up, 6. Anybody else? Just need 2 more. It's gonna be really fun. Just come down front right here. Yeah, you right here, Nate. You got you. All right, yeah, come on. All right. Are you coming down front? Awesome. I didn't pick you, but I was going to. I saw you back there. All right, come on down front. Now, here's what we did. After the wall thing, we did these things called trust falls. Have you ever done trust falls before? So they stand, behind you to start. It's really easy. You cross your arms, you do this whole thing, and they say, you have to say like, spotters ready, and the guy behind you says ready. You say falling, and he goes fall, and then you kind of go back a little bit, but you're only falling this far. And then the guy catches you and pushes you up, and you're like, well, that wasn't that fun. Then he takes a step back, and you do it again. Then he takes a step back. Eventually, he's far enough back that when you fall, like you put your foot back. And if you put your foot back, it's proof that, you really didn't trust anybody. So eventually, you go through this whole process, and you learn to trust the person behind you. And then they say, we're almost done. Before we finish trust falls, we're going to climb on top of these bleachers. And then we're gonna fall, and we are gonna catch you. So I thought we'd do that today. We're gonna do trust falls. So you guys can get your hands ready. Now overlap your hands and make sure they're flat, because I don't want to be poked by anything. That's weird. Okay, make sure they're flat. Now here's what's gonna happen. Now put your head back a little bit, okay? That's perfect. Now in a minute, I'm gonna fall. Now we gotta do the whole thing though, because I don't know any of you. Oh, I saw you at the gym before though. I trust you, you're strong. I saw that. Okay, so if you could catch this part of me, this is the heavier part. So I'm gonna say spotters ready, and what are you gonna say? Ready. But not like that, because you sound terrible. That is, yes, you're gonna be like bold, right? And then I'm gonna say falling, and what are you gonna say? Gotcha. No, not got you. You're gonna say fall, because that makes me know that you're actually paying attention. Does that sound good? Yep. All right, so I'm gonna trust you guys. You ready? Yep. Okay, here we go. All right, spotters ready? That was really good. That made me feel confident. That was good. Okay. All right. That's what's testing. All right. You ready? Spotters ready? Ready. Oh, one more thing. If you bend when you fall, they call it funnel butt, and you go right through the middle. And that hurts. And so I'm going to be really flat like a board, okay? So when I fall, right, your thumbs are a little bit higher. They need to be more flat. And you're right in this area. That's going to be a problem. Okay. Okay. You ready? No, I hadn't said it yet. Pay attention. Spotters ready? Ready. Falling. Fall. That's pretty good. He's putting my feet down. Are you going to throw me back up? Okay. That's amazing. All right, you guys go sit down. Way to go. Thank you. It's always nerve-wracking when you get volunteers who don't know what you're doing. Now, here's the point of the trust fall, right? When it comes to adulting, in our relationships, it feels a lot like trust falls. In fact, for a lot of us, trust falls are kind of a metaphor for adulting in our adult relationships. I mean, in a real way, like relationships are kind of like these repeated trust falls, right? Like you trust somebody and you fall and they catch you, and you trust and you fall and they catch you, and then they catch you, and then they catch you, and then they don't. there's that moment where they don't catch you and you kind of panic, don't you? Because it causes you to question if you can trust again. Trust is really critical in a relationship, and it kind of is like repeating these trust falls. And when someone catches you, you feel okay trusting again, but what do you do if they drop you? Or what if they drop you a couple of times in a row, right? It makes it kind of hard to trust. See, in relationships, trust may be the most important thing. It's also where trust is tested the most. And it's really what makes adulting hard. See, adulting is hard because relationships are just not optional. Like you can't get around relationships if you're an adult. I mean, people are the worst, but they're around you all the time. And it's really hard to be an adult and not be in relationships. I mean, think about all the different kinds of relationships that we have as adults. I mean, as adults, we have like dating relationships. Sometimes those lead to a married relationship. If you're married, you may have the pleasure of having children. And I say the word pleasure loosely, but you have the pleasure of having children. But that's a relationship. It's a really critical relationship. In fact, when you've seen parents and children not going well, inevitably the child ends up going off, sometimes going awry, sometimes making terrible decisions. It often comes down to a lack of a real relationship with a parent. I mean, think about the relationships you have at work. You have peer-to-peer relationships. You may be a boss or a business owner and you have employees who you have relationships with. You may have a boss and you have a relationship with that person. I mean, gosh, even in our homes, I mean, we live in neighborhoods. You have relationships with neighbors. Sometimes they're good, sometimes not, but it's a relationship. I mean, even when you go out to eat or go shop at a store, there's a version of a relationship happening. And adulting is hard because those kinds of relationships are not optional, which also means that trust is required. Like relationships are hard, but they're not optional. And it really does make trust required. I mean, think about some of the relationships you've had in the past, or maybe even one you're in right now. Now, don't elbow anybody, but can you think of an unhealthy relationship that you've been in? I guarantee you a part of the unhealth was a trust issue. Part of the reason it was unhealthy was a trust issue. I mean, I can think about some unhealthy relationships that I've been in before. Trust was a central part of the problem. I mean, every middle school dating relationship I had was a trust problem because trust is so connected to relationships. And adulting requires relationships, making trust a huge part of our adulting lives. In fact, I mean, a relationship without trust is kind of like a car without gas. I mean, you can sit in it all you want, but it's just not going to go anywhere. And that's how a relationship is, if trust isn't a part of it. Now, before we try to start solving the trust issues, we should talk for a minute about how we get to the broken trust, or kind of how we find ourselves in a situation where trust is broken. And the real word is the word expectation. And there's really nothing wrong with having expectations. At least on the surface, there's nothing wrong with having expectations. I mean, trust fall, like I expected that these people would catch me. I mean, it's called a trust fall. It's not called let's see what happens fall, right? It's a trust fall. I had an expectation. And you have expectations in your relationships, and they're really fair. I mean, you expected that she wouldn't lie. That's a fair expectation. If we could get a little bit, deeper for a minute, you expected that he wouldn't cheat on you. That's a fair expectation. I mean, you expected that they would stay. I mean, after all, he's your dad. I mean, after all, she's your mom. Of course, it's fair to expect that they would stay. But when expectations aren't met, it causes some trouble for us when it comes to trusting. I mean, when our experience doesn't kind of meet our expectation, it causes us to lose trust. In fact, every single time what we experience doesn't meet what we expect, it creates a gap, and in that gap is filled with mistrust often. And the problem is way bigger than just that relationship, and you know that. Like when your experience and your expectation in a relationship is broken, when that doesn't kind of match up, it doesn't just affect that relationship, does it? Like when you have a trust issue in a relationship, it seems to affect a lot of other relationships. In fact, when you have a trust issue in a relationship in your past, it often lives on with you and affects your present. Because the reality is when our experience doesn't meet our expectation, we actually can lose our ability to trust. I mean, you fell and you expected that they would catch you, and they didn't. And now, there is no way you're gonna do a trust fall again. I mean, after all, right, you expected that she would be honest, and she wasn't honest. And you're struggling to trust her, but you struggle to believe that anybody's telling the truth. In fact, you're suspicious of everybody. because that broken trust has affected you today. You stood there and you were getting married and you recited vows to each other and you made promises to each other. Now, you didn't say explicitly, now I have an expectation that you won't have an affair, but you had one, and that's a fair expectation. I do, and then they didn't. And that was a long time ago. I mean, he had the affair years ago, decades ago, and you've moved on from that relationship. In fact, you're in a completely new marriage, completely new guy, yet you're questioning him all the time. And he tells you where he was, but you're not sure. And you're checking your phone a lot, and you're looking at his text, and you're suspicious and you're worried because what used to be kind of an impossibility became possible, and now it just feels even likely in this new relationship. Or maybe you were 7 or 10 or 12 and your dad left. Or maybe your mom walked out and you didn't even know why. In fact, you've spent a lot of time thinking it was your fault, and it wasn't your fault. You had nothing to do with it. But they did leave. And now you seem to struggle to trust anybody. In fact, it's really hard for you to give your heart to anyone because you're afraid that they may just walk away too. And you're not sure it's worth the pain. You see, when trust is broken in one area of our life, it doesn't just stay in that one area. When trust is broken in one area of our life, it follows us into every area of our life, which is a real problem because adulting requires relationships and relationships require trust if it's going to be healthy. So here's what I want us to do today. We're not going to deal specifically with the person who broke your trust. We could do that. We could probably do a whole 3 or 4 week series on that. Repairing trust with someone who broke it is going to involve a lot of forgiveness. It's going to involve a lot of time. It's probably going to involve some counseling. Those are all fair things that you should probably consider. Today, though, I want to focus a little bit more on what do we do in the other aspects of our life. I want to focus a little bit more on what do we do when trust was broken and now we're struggling to trust again. Because not having the ability to ever trust again destroys every relationship we're ever going to try to have. And it leads to a lot of misery. It leads to a lot of isolation. It leads to a lot of bitterness and anger and loneliness. And that's not adulting well at all. Now, to kind of get us going where we're going to go, we're going to look at a chapter in the Bible. It's 1 Corinthians 13. A guy named Apostle Paul. Paul wrote this chapter. You've probably heard of it before. It's called the love chapter. Chapter 13, 1 Corinthians. Now, you, like Tina Turner, may be wondering, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a secondhand emotion? What's love got to do with it? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? You may be wondering that too. But love and trust have a lot to do with it because, just like Tina and just like Paul understood, love and trust are inextricably linked. They're kind of required for each other, especially in healthy adult relationships. So 1 Corinthians 13, it's called the love chapter. Even if you're not a church person, like you're kind of here because you're getting a free lunch or whatever out of this, that's cool. You've probably heard this verse. And the reason is that if you went to a wedding, this is read at almost every wedding. In fact, at my wedding, it was sung at my wedding, which is really weird because it's not a song. So I wouldn't encourage that. However, you have probably heard it, okay? 1 Corinthians 13, and we're gonna pick it up in verse 4. Here's what Paul said, okay? We're gonna go slow. Love is, gonna go slow, okay? Love is. Now I have to pause though, and the reason is because when we hear the word love, we all kind of have a connotation. That's a loaded word, especially in a kind of Western culture. I mean, we say things like, man, I really love my wife. I really love my kids. I really love hot dogs. I really love my Jeep. I don't have one, but you might. Like, I really love all these things. And those are fair things to say, but I mean, the kinds of love are different, right? I hope you love your spouse in a different way than you love hot dogs. Like, I hope you love your children in a different way than you love your boat, right? I mean, maybe not, but hopefully so. That word love is kind of loaded. Here's what Paul actually said. The Greek word he used is the word agape. In fact, can we just say that together? Like 1, 2, 3. Well, you're like fluent in Greek. That's amazing. Okay, agape. Agape is a really specific kind of love. There are 4 kinds of love in the Bible, and we translate all of them to the word love, but there are these 4 different kinds of love, and they each have a different kind of connotation. This agape love is actually the highest form of the 4 versions of love. Agape love is this completely selfless love. It's a love that puts other people ahead of you. It's not necessarily a romantic love. It's actually talked about a little bit more kind of like a brotherly love. But it's the kind of love that is characterized by the sacrificing of your own privileges or the sacrificing of your own rights for the benefit of somebody else. It's the kind of love that sees other people as being more important than you. It's the kind of love that sees other people before you see you. It's the kind of love that is constantly trying to find a way to serve someone, to live for someone, to do good for someone else. That's what agape love is. And you've heard lots and lots and lots of Bible verses with that word in it. In fact, one of the most popular ones, we talk about this verse all the time. You've heard the question that our friend Andy Stanley has kind of made us ask a lot, like, what does love require of me? That actually comes from a passage that uses a derivative of agape. This is Jesus speaking. He said, a new command I give you, agape one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. That word love there is that agape word. And what he was saying is that when you love someone else, love them the way that I have loved you. And how has Jesus loved us? Unconditionally. He put you first, even though you didn't deserve it, and even though you didn't earn it, and even though he wasn't sure that you could be trusted, he did it anyway. That's kind of what Paul is referring to, that kind of love. So with that in mind, let me show you the characteristics that Paul gives us around love, and then we're going to get to that word trust because he includes it towards the end. Here's kind of how he describes this agape kind of love. So agape love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no records of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices with the truth. Those are some of the characteristics of agape love. Now, listen really quick. He's not saying, okay, they cheated on you 7 times, but trust again. That's not this, okay? What he is saying is that there is a way to love people in which you do put them first. That this kind of love isn't the kind of love that tries to catch someone doing something wrong. It's the kind of love that moves things forward. It's the kind of love that moves relationships forward. It's the kind of love that considers others as more important than themselves. It's the kind of love that lets go of rights to make things right. It's that kind of love, agape love. And then he kind of punctuates it. He gives us these 4 always statements about this kind of love, and he uses our word trust in one of them. He says, this love always protects, and here's our word, always trusts. It always hopes, it always perseveres. You could almost say it this way, that this kind of love always gives the benefit of the doubt. This kind of love doesn't turn to suspicion. This kind of love doesn't keep a record of what happened. It hopes for better. It perseveres through trials. It believes the best about people. That's the kind of love that he's talking about. And he says it's connected to trust. He actually punctuates the whole thing in the end with this beautiful statement. He says, agape love never fails. It never fails. You know what it never fails to do? It never fails to make things better. This kind of love never fails to move relationships forward. This kind of love never fails to change people, both people in the relationship. This kind of love really does believe the best. It wants the best. It hopes for the best. And trust is directly correlated or connected to that kind of love. See, if love always trusts, then trust gives the benefit of the doubt. If love always trusts, then trust looks for the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior. Now, I know if I heard your story, you would go, not so much. And I understand. Trust me, I do. I understand that the struggle is real, and to trust the person who broke your trust over and over and over, that's difficult. And maybe you shouldn't fully trust that person in the same way you used to. But if you're allowing their breaking of trust to destroy your other relationships, they are controlling adulting for you. And they're controlling love for you, and they're controlling healthy relationships for you, and you shouldn't allow them to control that. It's a part of what makes adulting hard, though. In fact, when we think about it this way, if we can begin to consider what that version of trust looks like, if we can consider the version of what kind of the love looks like, it has the potential to change everything about our relationships. In fact, it has the potential to allow us to have the most healthy kind of relationships. So here's what I think we should do. I'd love to talk about 3 specific things that can really help us move towards a better trust in our adult relationships. No matter what your story is, no matter what your background is, and no matter how much trust has been broken, there is a way, I believe, there is a way to move beyond that brokenness into a place of wholeness. And it may be with new relationships, and sometimes it should be with different relationships. But when we allow that brokenness to enter in the new relationship is going to end up feeling a lot like the old one. And none of us want that. I know you don't want that. So 3 quick things that will help us do that. Here's the first one. When we think about trusting again, learning to trust Jesus is what actually frees us to trust others. And that's a really, really big deal. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this one for a minute. Because when you can learn to trust Jesus first, it frees you up to trust other people next. And the beauty of trusting Jesus is that he is the most trustworthy person you will ever trust. He's by far the most trustworthy. As he has said, never will he leave you, never will he forsake you. Jesus isn't looking for you to be trustworthy in return. He just wants to trust you, and he just wants you to trust him. In fact, all of your trust issues with Jesus are your issues. Jesus does not need to go to counseling to learn to trust you. He doesn't need help with loving you. He's full in 100%. The issue is on our end. And I often think the issue is on our end because we've struggled with trust before and we assume that Jesus is like the other people who have hurt us, but he's not. So what does it look like to trust Jesus? That feels a little ethereal, doesn't it? So just to get super practical, trusting Jesus is a lot like trusting anybody else. It's about leaning in his direction in a way where trust is required. Now, for some of you, coming to church today may be a version of that because this is really uncomfortable. Maybe you grew up in churches and had bad church experiences, or maybe you just had bad Christian experiences because there's a lot of bad ones out there. And maybe that's a big deal for you to be here today, and that's a version of trust. I would say, way to go. That's gonna help your relationship with Jesus because you're doing something that requires his participation. But for most of us, being here today isn't helping that. I mean, I hope it's helpful, but your relationship with Jesus isn't really being tested because trust isn't really that necessary right now. Maybe you know this, that relationships grow through shared experiences. Intimacy grows through shared experiences. Like physical intimacy grows through shared experiences. That's why after physical intimacy, you feel different with the person. This is why God said you should save it for marriage. It's why. Because there's a level of intimacy that should be kind of saved for that. That's why he said that. Because any kind of shared experience actually leads to a deepened relationship. And that's true physically. It's also true emotionally. It's also true relationally. It's true spiritually. So let me ask you this. When you think about your relationship with Jesus, what are you doing with him that actually requires his participation in a shared experience? That's a really big question to answer. For instance, if you're serving, but serving is really easy, I wonder if there's something next for you. Maybe the next thing for you is a shared experience somewhere other than a church. Maybe what's next for you is getting on an airplane and flying across the ocean and landing in a place where the guards have AK-47s at the airport. That's scary, but guess what? It's gonna require Jesus' involvement and it will deepen your relationship. Have you ever wondered why people come back from mission trips and they talk so much about how their faith grew? That's why. It was a shared experience where Jesus was involved. For some of you, it may be generosity, like you that just scares you to death. That's fantastic if it scares you. Do something that scares you and requires Jesus to participate. I love it when people tell me, oh my gosh, if Jesus didn't show up, I don't know what was gonna happen. And I think, oh my man, you are positioned for a growing relationship. So what is that for you? Trust Jesus first. Test him first. It will free you up to begin testing others and trusting others as well. Now, let me go through the next two. I'll do them way faster, though. Here's the second one. We have to remember that trust is actually a choice. It's not a result. When Paul talked about this trust and love and how they work together, he said that it's a choice. He said that we get to choose trust over suspicion. We get to choose how we fill in the gaps between what we expect and what we experience. We get to make those decisions on our own, but it's a choice. Which means in every relationship that we have, we get to choose. We get to choose if we're gonna opt for trust or opt for something other than that. And ultimately, it really does come down to a choice. And here's the last one. The last one is that we have to become trustworthy because becoming personally trustworthy really matters. If you want to trust other people, we have to remember that relationships are always kind of two-way streets. And if you're going to trust somebody else, they're going to want to trust you. But if you're not very trustworthy, then that trust is going to crumble and that relationship is going to crumble. So what does it look like for you to be a man or a woman of your word? Like, what does it look like for you to be honest, for you to be vulnerable about your strengths, but also about your weaknesses? What does it look like for you, for your yes to be your yes, for your no to be your no? What does it look like for you to stay? What does it look like for you to commit? Being trustworthy is a huge part of this relationship. It's what makes adulting a lot better. Now, I know I said this earlier, and I get it. Your stories are so unique. With this many people kind of engaging with us, I mean, there's no doubt that we have every version of story you could imagine. And some of our stories are easier to navigate than others. But in every story, trust is actually possible. Even if it isn't with the person who broke it, it is with other people. And after all, what's our kind of alternative? Like, if we could really think for a minute, what's our other option? I mean, there's no guarantee that if you choose trust over suspicion that everything will turn out rosy. It's not a fairy tale, right? This isn't a Disney movie. I mean, if you choose to trust, there's nothing in Scripture that says, and everything will be great. It is very possible that you could choose trust and it end up hurting you. It's possible that you could choose trust and it lead to pain. But here's what I have learned, and I bet a lot of you have as well, that choosing trust may cause pain, but refusing to trust guarantees pain. Because refusing to trust guarantees isolation. And refusing to trust guarantees anger. Refusing to trust guarantees loneliness. It guarantees anger and bitterness. So sure, choosing to trust may lead to some pain, but refusing to trust guarantees it. And if you are allowing the past trust gaps to affect your present realities and relationships, you're probably experiencing more pain than your Heavenly Father wants you to. So what does it look like for you to trust? What does it look like for you to try to trust again? What does it look like to trust Jesus for the first time? What does it look like to go a little further with that trust relationship? What does it look like to think about trust as a choice, not a result? What does it look like? What does it look like to become more trustworthy? Those are the things that make adulting way better the minute we can figure out trust.